Welcome to Putback on SNY.TV. I'm Ian Begley here with my buddy Chris Williamson.
What's up, Ian? Let's get into the baseline and kick things off. So last week we focused on the NBA draft and how the cap could influence that. So let's shift to free agency. What's the latest when it comes to the New York Knicks?
Recently, there's been some scuttlebutt about the Knicks and Fred Vanvleet. I know several outlets, including The Athletic, Knicks Film School, the Daily News, have tied the Knicks to VanVleet, and I am told that he is indeed on their radar as a potential free agent, but I'm not sure how strongly the Knicks are interested in VanVleet. But I think there's several scenarios that would impact their interest. If the Knicks traded for Chris Paul, I would assume that they wouldn't then put together the assets or the contract offer that it would take. And also, I think if the Knicks drafted a point guard at 8 or higher, lower, whatever, I don't know if they would then dedicate the money to signing VanVleet to a long-term deal, because then you're taking minutes away from that rookie point guard. Another factor here, although I don't think it's a big factor, but there are supporters of Dennis Smith Jr. in that Knick organization. So if you sign VanVleet, you might bury Dennis Smith Jr. on your bench. So maybe that's another factor, although again, not a big factor.
Right, it's not a big factor, but it is a factor to consider. They got him in return for Porzingis. So how much do you think they're invested in his development going forward?
Right. So even though, Chris, that was a previous regime that made that trade, I just know that there are people in the organization that would like to see Dennis Smith Jr. succeed this upcoming season. And Tom Thibodeau, for whatever it's worth, was a big Dennis Smith Jr. fan before the draft in 2017 when he was president of the Minnesota Timberwolves. You know, last year was a tough year for Dennis Smith Jr. He had the injuries. He had a death in the family, so he had an up and down season. I'm sure he would say it wasn't a satisfying season, so I would imagine that he'd be motivated coming back to this Knick team ahead of the 2020-21 season.
I'll break it down.
This week's guest is Ryan McDonough, former Suns GM and Celtics executive and co-host of Scow and Pals on radio.com.
I work with Leon closely. We had a number of players when I was GM of the Phoenix Suns, and even before that when I was in the Boston Celtics front office for 10 years, that were represented by CAA and by Leon Rose individually, including Devin Booker. He was one of the more enjoyable agents to deal with. He's smart, he is fair, he is principled, he's a deal maker. And I say that in a good way because at times, as you can imagine, between a front office and the agent or agency, those negotiations or relationships can be tense. Leon always had a great way of diffusing the situation, either calming down the player or calming down the team, or bringing sides together for the purposes of doing a deal. And I think if anybody's going to get the New York Knicks and that ship righted, Leon has a great chance to be that guy.
Do you think those attributes can translate and can help him in his role as team president? Do you see it as that much of an easy transition?
I don't think it's an easy transition. I think it's actually a difficult transition, but some have done it very well. As you can imagine, Ian, the strengths are knowledge of players, relationships with players, dealing with issues, not only with the players, but obviously with their representatives, with their families and friends and people around them. That's right in Leon Rose's wheelhouse. The challenge will be, now he is not just worried about a player or a few players that he represents and knows well. And in Leon's case, he was great at getting clients and retaining them for a long period of time. So there was a relationship built over time. Now he is airdropped into a front office with up to 17 players on the roster with two-way contracts and all that. They have a lot of decisions to make this offseason and then next offseason as well, with partially or non-guaranteed contracts. And Leon will have to sift through all that. He'll have to navigate all that. They also have a top pick coming in the lottery this year. He'll have to deal with that. And then, figure out, guys, how to get the franchise turned around. And the challenge, guys, I found this out to some extent the hard way in Phoenix. You come in new, you come in fresh, as Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau do, but that doesn't take away the organizational history, and that doesn't take away the fact that ownership and a lot of people in their organization have been waiting a long time to get the Knicks back to their playoff level and hopefully to that championship contending level. So that does put some immediate short-term pressure on Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau.
I'm guessing that Devin Booker negotiation wasn't that tough for Leon and your seat. But, there's been so much talk about players the Knicks could go after because Leon once represented that player, which I think is a little far-fetched. one of the names that have come up is Devin Booker. Is it crazy for any fan to kind of fantasize about the idea that Phoenix would eventually trade Devin Booker?
Yeah, I don't think they would trade him unless it's something that Devin wanted, which, again, I've been out of the franchise almost 2 full years now. So, but my, what I know, I don't think he wants that. Keep in mind, they were the only undefeated team in the bubble. I understand the connection and all that. You'll hear it not only with Devin Booker, but with Karl Anthony Towns and other players represented by Leon Rose. But keep in mind, guys, those guys are max players. Devin and Karl essentially have the same contract. It's a 5-year max contract that they're really just beginning. That means that really the franchise would have to want to trade them. And in the case of the Phoenix Suns with Booker, or in the case of the Minnesota Timberwolves with Karl Anthony Towns, I'm not sure why you would want to trade those guys. I think, in fact, the opposite is true. They're going to want to keep those guys and build around them and try to get their team to a contending level.
Yo, Ian, I've been analyzing every single picture coming out of the Delete 8 bubble. Honestly, just happy to have the Knicks kinda, sorta back. One thing I've been wondering about is the real KP, Kenny Payne, working with Mitch, Randall, and Knox. Is there anybody else that Payne has taken under his wing, and who do you see benefiting the most from his tutelage? Thanks.
Wallace, you're a great producer. I respect your dedication and your passion to the Knicks, but bro, get a hobby. I mean, are you really analyzing every photo on social media coming out of these workouts? With regard to Kenny Payne, I don't want to pigeonhole him to one position because I think he worked with all positions at Kentucky and helped those guys develop into NBA players. But if I'm looking at the Knicks and I'm focusing on one player, I'm focused on Mitchell Robinson because Anthony Davis and Karl Anthony Towns at Kentucky sung Kenny Payne's praises. And Mitchell Robinson is a big with a lot of untapped potential. So if you're keeping an eye on one player, I would keep an eye on Mitch and how he benefits from Kenny Payne.
I think they will be better, especially with Tom Thibodeau, who I know very well. We worked together for 3 years in the Celtics front office. So the team will be better. They'll be more competitive. But better is a relative term. As you guys know, they were light years away from the playoffs this year. My guess is, guys, they try to incrementally improve their team next year. And so they can go to free agents in the loaded 2021 class, led by potentially Giannis Antetokounmpo, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, Victor Oladipo, guys like that, and say, look, I know what's gone on here in the past, but look at how much we improved in year one with you or a couple of you guys in year two. We have a ton of cap flexibility, and I think try to do it that way rather than overpaying or signing a bunch of free agents in year one, because frankly speaking, guys, there isn't that much talent in the marketplace this year. Even like a good player like Fred VanVleet would help the Knicks improve, but that's not going to take them from the basement to championship contending in year one.
Let's put your GM hat on, Ryan. How would you use the Knicks cap space and future first-round picks if you're running this current team?
Yeah, so Chris, I think the Knicks need a multi-pronged approach. And what I mean by that is they need to figure out different paths where they're not reliant on just one way to build a team. And that's where I think the Knicks have gotten in trouble in the recent past. Not like, all right, we're just going to build through the draft, or we're just going to make trades, or we're just going to be reliant on free agency. They had, in my opinion, the worst point guard rotation in the league. If there are multiple starters, guys, in my opinion, there's really no starter. Fred VanVleet or somebody like that, a veteran point guard with experience, would help a lot. But if you do that and you give them a multi-year contract, which they would have to get Fred in particular at a high dollar level, then you cut into your future flexibility.
And you mentioned how they need to improve, right? So they can attract more free agents. And one guy that they're trying to improve, take that next step, is Kevin Knox. When you look at him in his game, how do you think his value is around the league?
I think it's down right now. I think it was pretty high a few years ago coming out of the draft. People liked his length. They liked his athleticism. As you know, conceptually, he's what teams want, a long, athletic wing who can shoot and score. However, he hasn't done that efficiently. I think the next step for Kevin will be becoming more efficient with his shooting and scoring. And then the strength and the physicality. I think it's important for Knicks fans to keep in mind that this is still a very young player. As I look at his body, I think there's still a ways to go there. And I think he will fill out, but he has to, guys. He has to fully commit to strength training and nutrition. I wouldn't write him off, but to answer your question more directly, I don't think he has a ton of value around the league at the moment just because he hasn't proven to be efficient at a high level on an NBA court.
Ryan, we thank you so much, man, and we thank you for providing this on our show today, but if you want it every day, if you want it 5 days a week, radio.com, Scallon Pals, you can hear Ryan's analysis and the context that he provides as a former GM. For Ryan, I'm Ian, that's Chris, and we will see you next week on the Putback.